So today I'm going to throw a pot that's a little larger, and I've been considering what's more important, strength or technique. So I've come up with 3 points to consider while I make my pot. So my first consideration is choose the right clay. So this is an obvious but so often ignored point. Use clay that's not too hard. You need to be able to move the clay around easily. If your clay is too hard, you're going to struggle to center and require lots of water to center. It'll tire both you and the clay out before you start forming your pot. Choose a clay that has some texture, added fine grog or sand. This gives the clay some structure and makes it easier to throw larger. Obviously make sure that your clay is suitable for throwing though. Clay with heavy grog or sharp particles can do some damage to your hands. So the clay I'm using today has a texture that it's described as a number 4 texture on the scale between 1 and 10, which means that it has a little bit of tooth. I'm throwing with 10 pounds of clay. And that brings me to my next point. Divide and conquer. If I'm centering large amounts of clay, I'll divide it into parts. In this case, I've divided my clay into 2. So I've started by centering half, and now I'm adding the other half. Then I center this piece of clay and then center the 2 together. You can keep on adding clay this way and centering it. It really does make handling and centering large pieces of clay much easier. And centering efficiently means that both you and your clay are not tired out by the time you get to the next part. Now, I'd also like to point out at this point that I'm not particularly strong, but I have learnt to brace my arms. That is, I tuck my arm in against my torso. This is going to be a little different for everyone, and you'll need to find a position that works for you. We're talking leverage here. If you brace your arm against your body, you reduce the leverage effect. Your arms are closer to your body, and you require less force to move clay. It's more efficient. When you link your arms to your body, you're engaging your core and distributing the workload. Bracing your arms helps reduce unnecessary strain on your shoulders and reduces the risk of injury. That's always a good thing. So I've pushed down into the clay and I've opened up straight across the base. I'm ready to start pulling up the walls. So really I'm squeezing my hands together and coming up very evenly and slowly. I start right at the bottom of the pot and I squeeze from the inside out and from the outside back in and bring up my hands together very slowly and evenly, all the way to the top of the clay. And then I compress the top. So compressing the clay at the top, that is, support the clay with your left hand and gently press down with your right, or the other way, depending on which way your wheel is going, will help keep the top of your pot even. So I start at the bottom again, squeezing from the inside out and from the outside back in. You can see here I'm using my knuckle, but you could also use the heel of your hand. You can also use your fingertips. For larger amounts of clay, I definitely prefer to use my knuckle. So as you can see here, I've made quite a straight cylinder and I'm ready to shape. So with this next pulling up of the walls, I'm going to start to stretch the top of the clay outwards to try and get that width. And now I'm looking to get a more rounded form for my pot, so I'm pushing from the inside outwards to belly the pot out. And I'm going to smooth a little more using my flexible rib. I use an arrowhead tool to trim a little around the base of the pot. And now I'm ready to wire through and set my pot aside to dry to leather hard. I'm ready to trim my pot. So I carefully flip the pot over and I'm just going to trim a little around the base. Now my pot is heavy enough not to move around, so I don't really need to fasten it to the wheel head. I'm just going to trim across the base. The base should be slightly depressed. And then I trim a little more around the foot. And I like to smooth the base of my pots carefully. And that's it. I'm ready to dry and bisque fire. So my pot's bisqued and I'm going to glaze my pot. I've glazed the inside and now I'm just glazing the outside by pouring. I'm using a copper green glaze that I particularly like on this buff coloured clay. As I've mentioned before, I don't have a lot of storage space for glazes, so I'm going to pour. I do this on my wheel, but you could also use a banding wheel. So I've set up a pan, and as I rotate the wheel, I pour. I quite like poured glazes and don't mind the variation in the glaze. And then I glaze fire. So, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not the strongest, but I can use a bunch of techniques to help me make larger things. So let's take another look at those techniques. 1. Choose a suitable, not too hard clay with some fine grog or sand. 2. Divide your clay into manageable sizes for centering. 3. Brace your arms and use your body efficiently. Check out my large fruit bowl video for more techniques for making larger pieces. I hope this video has been useful, and as always, happy potting!